Hello! Welcome to a new episode of our podcast series The City as an Ecosystem. Today our journey takes us to Portbou in Spain, nested where the Pyrenees meet the Mediterranean, right on the French border. But our story does not start there. It actually begins in Amsterdam at the Westergasfabriek, then winds its way through Tel Aviv and Berlin, before finally arriving at Portbou. Today we delve deeper into an aspect that we will encounter more often: the truthfulness of the stories we are told about a particular place. How is that memory created? Which parts of the story are left out? How can you keep the past visible or make it visible again? What role can an artist play in this? In this podcast, we meet two remarkable individuals who both had strong opinions on this subject: the German Jewish philosopher Walter Benjamin and the Israeli artist Dani Karavan.
Evert, today's story begins at a special place here in the Netherlands, the Westergasfabriek in Amsterdam. What is your connection to that place, and why is it so important to this story?
Well, the Westergasfabriek. I have been responsible for its transformation from 1990 till 2005, working for the Westerpark district. We converted the site into a new park and cultural hotspot. Today I want to share a crucial aspect of that transformation. How do you make the history of a place visible while still telling its honest story? I love that place, and as fantastic as the final result is, I always felt it was a shame that with all the renovations and the construction of the park, we might completely lose the history of that place. The character of that old, dilapidated site where a gas factory once stood, and the fact that for decades gas had been produced there under the most horrific conditions to keep Amsterdam warm, to supply industry with fuel, and, more importantly, to light the city. That whole story would disappear with the construction of the park. There would be virtually nothing left to remind future visitors of what once took place there. I wondered whether we also had a responsibility to tell that story.
That sounds like a dilemma. I understand very well that you want to renovate. You can't leave such a place in the city unused for years. But at the same time, there was also the danger of erasing the past. Why was that so painful, especially in the case of a gas factory?
Well, that's the point, exactly. Who wants to know everything about gas production from coal? Not back then, and certainly not now. I've never been able to find any footage from documentaries about gas production on this factory. Over the years, thousands of books, documentaries and films have been made about Amsterdam. Do you think there are any images of the gas factory in operation? The idea of being given a tour there and hearing the story about the stench, the noise, the pollution. No, that just doesn't appeal to most people. It annoyed me even then. In the 1990s, we rented out the site for temporary projects. We had already started including in the contract that the name Westergasfabriek had to appear in all the public communications. And that was a conscious choice, after extensive discussions, out of respect for the place. But important tenants, such as large pop festivals and theatre companies, they flatly refused to put that name on their posters.
Oh, really? And what did they do?
They preferred to give the buildings completely different names. Or they simply didn't put the location where the activity would take place on the poster. During Mojo's Drum Rhythm Festival, the Zuiveringshal was suddenly called Neon and the gas holder became Krypton. 100 years of history, made invisible. Of course we agreed. We thought it was far too much fun to have all those world-famous artists there.
Quite shocking, actually. Though, on the other hand, there's a certain appeal to pragmatically severing ties with the past, to simply forgetting. Was this, perhaps, linked to the association with the Second World War? The word gas is, of course, heavily loaded.
That had everything to do with it. The association with the Second World War and the gas chambers is obvious and sensitive. Ischa Meijer, a famous interviewer and columnist at the time, wrote about it in the Parool, a daily newspaper in Amsterdam. I will never forget that he wrote, "I am not going to the gas factory. My parents never came back from it." That says it all.
That is indeed very poignant. And what you describe here, consciously or unconsciously glossing over part of history, or ignoring the less pleasant aspects of a place, reminds me of something and someone you will talk about later in this story, the philosopher Walter Benjamin.
Indeed. In my view, it is the erasure of history that Walter Benjamin so vehemently opposed in his thesis on the concept of history. He called it the victor's history. History as told by those in power, who often omit or rewrite the painful, uncomfortable, or less glorious parts of the past. And this is a recurring theme we will explore in this podcast series. It is often presented as an extreme, either very good, the victor's triumphant narrative, or nothing at all, the loser's forgotten story, and rarely anything in between. The idea that you can simply give a place that is so fraught with history a new, fresh name without saying anything about what it used to be, it struck me as extremely reprehensible at the time. I believed that you should not conceal it, you should give it a place. I have always believed that there should be at least something to remind visitors of that story from the past. Something that brings back the noise, the stench, the dirt and the pollution of gas production. Because I saw no way of resolving this within the project itself, I wanted to find an artist who could give shape to it. Someone who would have been able to make the invisible visible.
So you felt that something else was needed at the Westergasfabriek. As you say, an artist who could make the invisible visible. How did you end up with Dani Karavan? I assume you don't just call a world-famous artist out of the blue.
Haha, no, that's not how it works. It was actually pure coincidence, or perhaps fate. Even though the artwork never came to fruition, I'd still like to share the experience. At the end of 2002, I was on a short trip to Valencia in Spain. And I was staying there with Pablo Otoola, a good friend. He had just quit his job in Bilbao, where he had been responsible for the transformation of the city and the construction of the Guggenheim Museum. He had now become director of the IVAM, the Museum of Modern Art in Valencia. and he invited me to visit a newly opened exhibition with him, a major retrospective on the Israeli artist Dani Karavan.
I don't know him. Were you already familiar with his work? Or was this your first encounter with it?
Well, that's interesting. I'm sure the same thing would happen to you. When I saw those artworks, I immediately realized that I had seen several of his works before, either in public spaces or in photographs, without knowing that they were his. Of course, I had never really realized that they were all by the same artist. But I was immediately very impressed. I thought this could be the man I was looking for, and that this was how it had to be done.
And then? Did you get his number from Pablo and call him right away? That's pretty bold.
Yes, Pablo did indeed give me Dani Karavan's phone number in Paris right away. And yes, a week later I contacted him. We agreed that I would meet him again a few weeks later at his studio in Paris. And there I immediately asked him, would you like to design a small monument for the Westergasfabriek Park, something that makes the memory of that place's past tangible and palpable?
What was Dani Karavan like as a person? Did you hit it off right away?
Dani Karavan? He was always very friendly. But it also quickly became clear that if he didn't feel like doing something, he simply wouldn't do it. I also found him an imposing figure, with his bald head and a few grey hairs at the sides. He talked a lot, an enormous amount, but he always chose his words very carefully. His opinions were always outspoken, very clear. He immediately understood what I was talking about. He also always showed genuine interest. He always asked about me and my family. That first evening we went out to eat together in Paris, at one of his favorite local restaurants. We sat there talking for hours and ate candied ginger after dessert. Candied ginger, I'm still looking for it everywhere. I think he wanted to test me, to see if I was trustworthy as a potential client.
So your relationship grew beyond just work. Did he take you to Tel Aviv?
Oh no, that was also a coincidence. At the time when buses were occasionally exploding in Tel Aviv and the Dutch newspaper advised against traveling to Israel, I received an invitation from the Israeli lottery to advise on the new Ayalon Park that they wanted to build near Tel Aviv. So I went to Tel Aviv and met him during the week I was there. I also met his wife there. We had dinner together. He told me about his father, Abraham Karavan, who emigrated from Poland to Israel in the 1920s. His father was Tel Aviv's most important landscape architect from the early 1940s to the late 1960s. So he was responsible for all the parks and the green spaces that make Tel Aviv such an attractive city today.
And he was also politically outspoken himself, I understand, given the context of Israel.
Certainly. Dani Karavan never referred to it as Israel. He called it Palestine. He truly believed that Jews and Palestinians could simply live together there. A year later, I saw him again when I visited Lucca in Tuscany with my wife and my daughter, where we visited his beautiful sculpture garden near Celle. In the meantime, he had been to Amsterdam and I had been to Paris again.
So you had developed a special bond with Dani Karavan, and he seemed like the perfect person to visualize the story of gas production. But the artwork never materialized, did it? What went wrong?
Unfortunately, no. It never happened. But to be honest, not much went wrong at that point. My clients, the Westerpark District Council, were fine with me talking to him, going to Paris and making preparations for the artwork. But the money we needed for it wasn't there yet and never came. And that's a real shame. Initially, Dani Karavan himself had doubts about intervening in the park, whose design he actually already considered to be a work of art. He felt that the landscape architects, Katrin Gustafsson, would be better suited to do something like that herself. But I invited him to Amsterdam, and there he met Katrin and her agency partner Neil Porter, and they were very enthusiastic about his ideas. And that is why he did end up creating a design for me. Incidentally, we had been very clear with each other from the outset. Many more plans are scrapped than are implemented.
So there was a design, but why wasn't it built? Was it about money, as is so often the case?
Actually, yes. I failed to convince enough people. The point was not only that there had to be money for the construction of the artwork, but also that a substantial budget had to be allocated for the maintenance. And that was the stumbling block for many.
Was there no appreciation for his work in the Netherlands? Or was he simply unknown?
The latter, especially. Here in the Netherlands, no one had ever heard of Dani Karavan. No one showed any enthusiasm whatsoever when I mentioned his name. That made financing the project almost impossible. And then there are those art committees that distribute the subsidies. They really hate it when ordinary people like me, a project manager for the government, without the right art education, propose an artist and a work of art. They really hate it when ordinary people like me, a project manager for the government, without the right art education, propose an artist and a work of art.
Because there are strict procedures and lists of favorite artists.
Of course. That is what advisory committees are for. Complicated meetings, hours of consultation, convincing various advisors. Imagine if they just agreed with me. They have their own lists, after all. And if that artist's name is not on that list, then that artist simply will not be considered. Dani Karavan has never been on any list anywhere in the Netherlands, let alone in Amsterdam.
That is incredibly frustrating. Especially when you consider that this man is highly respected internationally and has done fantastic work in many places around the world. Can we talk about some examples of that?
Certainly. Dani Karavan has created beautiful works of art in public spaces all over the world. In Germany in particular, in cities such as Cologne, Gelsenkirchen, Dortmund, Berlin, you will find impressive projects by him. And the most moving of all his works is undoubtedly the monument to the murdered Sinti and Roma, right next to the Reichstag building in Berlin. That is an incredibly powerful work. But he has done much more than that. Think of the Axe Majeur in Cergy-Pontoise near Paris. It is beautiful and overwhelming. One of his very first works was the monument to the 6 Days War in the Negev Desert in Israel. Later, he even designed the artwork on the wall behind the speakers in the Knesset in Jerusalem. And then there is the White Square monument in Tel Aviv, located in a park overlooking the famous White Bauhaus city. The very first work of his that I saw, even before I knew him, was that small square in the Louisiana Museum in Denmark. But in Amsterdam? No, they had never heard of him there. He was not on their lists, and that even though he tells such important stories with his art.
Evert, you mentioned earlier that the monument to the murdered Sinti and Roma in Berlin moves you. Let's talk about that for a moment. Many people know Berlin as a city full of monuments, especially when it comes to the Holocaust. Why is this specific monument to the Sinti and Roma so important, and why is a separate memorial site necessary, alongside, for example, the Jewish Holocaust Monument?
I think that is a very important question, and it goes to the heart of why this monument was so necessary. Many people are familiar with the Holocaust, the persecution and murder of Jews during the Second World War, and that must always remain so. But the genocide of the Sinti and Roma, also known as the Porajmos, is much less well known. They were persecuted, deported and murdered by the Nazis just as systematically, often using the same horrific methods and in the same camps as the Jews.
And how many victims did the Porajmos claim?
It is estimated that between 250,000 and 500,000 Sinti and Roma were murdered by the Nazi regime, but no one really knows the actual number. Quite simply because this group of people received hardly any attention either before or after the war. This monument, which was only opened in 2012 and is located in the heart of Berlin, right next to the Reichstag and the Brandenburg Gate, is an essential recognition of their immense suffering. It is a way to finally make their story, which has been in the shadows for so long, visible.
You say that this artwork is the most impressive of everything you have seen. Can you describe what moved you so much, and how Dani Karavan designed it?
If there were a ranking for impressiveness, I would place this work of art somewhere at the very top. Karavan has created a circular pond with a deep black bottom, and that black bottom gives the illusion of infinite depth. It is as if you are looking into a bottomless pit.
That sounds very powerful. What was Karavan trying to express with that depth, that pit?
Dani Karavan himself put it this way. Do I have the power within me to create a place of nothingness, where there's nothing, No words, no names, no metal, no stone. Only tears, only water, surrounded by the survivors, by those who remember what happened, by those who know horror and others who did not know it. They are all reflected here, standing on their heads in the water of the deep black pit, while the sky covers them. The water, the tears. And that is exactly what it is. Everything around you, the sky, the trees, the imposing Reichstag, the visitors, and even the German flag, everything is reflected and swallowed up in that deep black water. It draws you in, confronting you with the emptiness and the loss.
And despite all that sadness, is there still a glimmer of hope to be found in this artwork?
Yes, there is, even if it is very small. In the middle of that pond, you can see a black triangle. It is a small altar and very special. Every 24 hours it sinks down briefly at exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when a fresh rose is placed on that triangle. It is a daily ritual of remembrance and a tiny but constant act of life. And to make it even more poignant, near the monument you can always hear soft music, the sound of a violinist playing Sinti music. That music makes the monument truly special. It gives voice back to the murdered souls.
It seems like an incredibly impressive work of art there in Berlin, Everett. I think everyone who has heard this story will want to go and see it. But now we are going to another place, much less accessible, Port-Boo, on the Spanish-French border. Can you take us to Port-Boo?
Certainly. Let's transition to a place where all these threads, Dani Karavan, the erasure of history, and Walter Benjamin's ideas converge. Port-Boo. Imagine, nested right on the Mediterranean Sea, where the towering Pyrenees dramatically separate France from Spain. It is a place of breathtaking natural beauty, but also of profound human history. There is a hiking trail through the mountains where you often have a beautiful view on the sea. The trail runs from Banyuls in France to Port-Boo in Spain. If you come by train from France, it runs through a tunnel under the mountains. In Port-Boo there is a huge marshalling yard. Spain has a different track gauge than the rest of Europe. Of course, there is also a motorway, but it is far away. It is also in a tunnel and you cannot hear it. That path through the mountains from France to Spain is about 17 kilometers long. Along this route, left-wing revolutionaries escaped the fascist Franco regime during the Civil War. Not long after, the same path in the other direction became the escape route from Nazi-occupied France to neutral Spain. The path has probably been there for centuries. It is a beautiful path, but it is difficult. I hear that from experienced walkers who have walked it. How many people would have found freedom along this route? The Spanish section of the path is now named after the German Jewish philosopher and writer Walter Benjamin.
We have come across the name Walter Benjamin before. You mentioned him concerning the history of the victors. Can you tell us a little more about who he was and what drove him to this remote place in the Pyrenees?
Walter Benjamin, born in 1892 and died in 1940, was a German Jewish philosopher and the son of a Jewish German banker. He suffered from lung problems. His health was so poor that he was unable to serve in the German army during the First World War, despite volunteering. In Berlin, he mainly stayed with his parents in their large villa, but the inflation of 1923 made it increasingly difficult for them to support him financially. And after studying in Freiburg, Berlin and Bern, Benjamin graduated summa cum laude in philosophy in 1919. His work has had a major influence on literary studies, philosophy, aesthetics and media studies. Its importance lies in the unique way in which he brought together Marxism, Jewish mysticism, Messianism and modernity. Benjamin was fascinated by how technology and reproduction, such as photography and film, changed the experiences of art and reality. In one of his most famous essays, Das Kunstwerk im Zeitalter seiner technischen Reproduzierbarkeit, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, he argues that the aura, the unique presence of a work of art, disappears in the age of mass production. His unfinished Passages-Werk is a philosophical montage of quotations and observations about 19th century Paris. Walter Benjamin was a sharp political thinker. I came across him because of his writings on history, such as in the thesis on the concept of history, in which he says that the narrative of history is primarily one of linear, victorious history.
You describe his background and intellectual influence. But how did all this lead to his fateful journey to Portbou?
Benjamin worked as a journalist and translator. In Germany, where he lived, anti-Semitism became increasingly fierce after 1933. He first moved to Ibiza, then to Nice, but at a certain point he had nowhere else to go. His life was in danger. There were no safe places for him to go. In 1938, Jews were stripped of their German citizenship, and Benjamin became stateless. He was even imprisoned for 3 months solely because he was Jewish. In 1940, just before the German army reached Paris, friends helped him obtain a visa for the United States. The boat to the United States would depart from Portugal. And to get to Portugal, they first had to travel from France through neutral Spain. There were no direct connections. Walter joined a group of Jewish refugees who were going to walk from France to Spain. And that sounds a lot easier than it actually was. They had to hire a guide who knew the way. Most of the route was covered at night. They left France on the 26th of September 1940. And everyone in the group had papers for the crossing from Portugal to the US. Otherwise, there would have been no point in starting that journey. Walter Benjamin was 48 years old and in poor health. In addition to his lung problems, he also had diabetes. The walk was difficult and often steep and dangerous. It took hours before they arrived. And when they finally reached Port-Boo, Walter was very tired and needed his medication.
Wow, that's intense. It seems very difficult even for an experienced hiker. Let alone having to do it in the middle of the night, with your suitcase and briefcase in tow. But they did arrive in Port-Boo.
There they received terrible news. The Spanish police informed them that they could not let them through. The rules had changed. There was a problem. They had to send them back to France. Their guide for the walk to Port-Boo, Lisa Fitko, kept a diary, and she wrote, "They were allowed to stay in the Hotel Francia. Benjamin was given room number 3. They would be expelled the next day. For Benjamin, that day never came. He killed himself by swallowing the 15 morphine tablets he had carried with him in case his cardiac problems recurred." His farewell letter to Theodore W. Adorno confirmed it was suicide. In a hopeless situation, I have no choice but to end it. It is in a small village in the Pyrenees where no one knows me that my life will end. The next morning, his friends found his dead body. It is completely unclear why the other 22 people were allowed to continue their journey through Spain. Some say it was a mistake by the Spanish police. Others say the rules had changed. And still others say they were ashamed. But Walter Benjamin was dead. And in the decades following the Second World War, Walter Benjamin's death became a symbol of the intellectual catastrophe caused by European fascism. His death symbolizes the tragedy of intellectuals and Jewish refugees who were trapped between Nazi Germany and occupied France, and the apparent neutrality of Franco's Spain. The fact that it proved impossible for someone like Walter Benjamin to escape symbolizes Europe's failure to protect its thinkers and citizens. That, which was tragic in itself, thus became an event of enormous significance.
Yes, but at the same time, it's also just a very poignant story. I think of all those other refugees who arrive somewhere and are then told that they will be sent back. Complete arbitrariness.
Yes, especially that utter arbitrariness. Here too, it would take a long time before it became clear exactly what had happened. For the authorities in Port-Boo, the story ended with the burial of the remains and the departure of the 22 refugees. But for everyone who had known Walter Benjamin and heard the sad news of his death much later, that was only the beginning. Looking back, it is a textbook example of how, without any malicious intent, a conspiracy theory can come into circulation. Hannah Arendt, a close friend of Walter Benjamin's, was also in Port-Boo a few months after his death. She too was on her way to the United States. And after visiting Port-Boo, she wrote to Gershom Scholem. Months later, when we arrived at Port-Boo, we searched in vain for his grave. His name was nowhere. The cemetery looks off at a small bay, directly onto the Mediterranean. It is composed of terraces carved out of stone. The coffins are shoved into these stone walls. It is by far one of the most fantastically beautiful places I have ever seen. I can confirm that. The cemetery is indeed very beautiful. But what Hannah Arendt wrote there led to countless articles being published from that moment on, claiming all sorts of things, such as that Walter Benjamin's remains are not in Port-Boo. It was also said that he jumped off the cliff into the sea and that his body was never found. It has even been claimed that his body was thrown into a mass grave.
Of course, it's all understandable. Under such circumstances, all kinds of decisions are made whose consequences cannot be immediately foreseen.
Yes, that's how things go. Hannah Arendt was only in Port-Boo for a short time. She didn't get the chance to talk to the right people, nor did she look for the right names. The truth about his funeral, which turned out to be fairly simple, only came to light later.
But in the meantime, all kinds of stories had been circulating. And it seems to me that everyone in Port-Boo, where they had, of course, never heard of Walter Benjamin, was getting a little tired of all the attention.
Well, that's right. But let me first tell you how it probably happened, and then what they did about it in Port-Boo. The body had to be buried as quickly as possible. His friends could not return to France to arrange this. Leaving the body behind without a funeral was also not an option. In Port-Boo, as in most places in Spain at the time, there was only one cemetery, a Catholic one. In addition, it was impossible in Spain to bury a Jew in a Catholic cemetery. The coroner and the doctor therefore devised a ruse. On the death certificate, dated the 27th of September 1940, the name was changed to Benjamin Walter, 48 years old, from Berlin. To put an end to all speculations surrounding Walter Benjamin's death, a museum was set up for a short time where all the documents and the objects relating to Walter Benjamin's stay in Port-Boo were exhibited. One of the documents on display was the death certificate with the reversed name. There was also a receipt for the payment of the hotel room, which included the breakfast he had never eaten. Another bill listed a 4-day stay for the rest of the groups. That bill also included 5 lemon soft drinks, 4 telephone calls, dressing the body, disinfecting and whitewashing the room, and washing the mattress. There was also a receipt from a carpenter for making a fabric-covered coffin for El Difunto Señor Benjamin Walter. A receipt was also presented for 8 pesetas as payment for the work of a mason who had sealed the niche numbered 563 in the cemetery with a few stones. There was also a receipt issued by a priest dated October 1, 1940. 6 pesetas for a mass for the deceased and 75 pesetas for the 5-year lease of the niche in the cemetery. And thus the Jewish Walter Benjamin was buried as Benjamin Walter in niche 563 in the beautiful but Catholic cemetery in Port-Boo.
So the story of Walter Benjamin has been given a place, literally and figuratively. But for a long time, there was no tangible monument that encompassed this tragic event and its significance. That's where Dani Karavan came in, 50 years after Benjamin's death, correct?
That is how it was. On the 25th of September 1990, 50 years after his death, Dani Karavan was commissioned to create a monument to Walter Benjamin at this very spot. I don't know exactly who took the initiative, but it is certain that the monument was largely paid for by the German state. The monument was completed in 1994.
This is really fascinating, Evert. I find it fascinating how history and truth are intertwined here. The monument has been given the name, Passages, but wasn't that also the title of the text Walter Benjamin had with him on his journey through the Pyrenees? The incomplete manuscript of a book he was working on at the time, about the origins of Paris.
Dani Karavan's artwork is called Passages. Benjamin sought passages in modern life, and Karavan created the literal and figurative passages of hope, despair, and memory here.
Can you tell us a bit more about the artwork itself? Take us to the spot. Why is it there by the sea and not, for example, at the Hotel Francia, where Benjamin died?
For every work of art Dani Karavan has created, the location where it is made is always a very essential part. He strove to make a work of art fit as well as possible into the environment in which it is located. Here too, he took the time to decide where the work would be placed. The most important part of the monument is a staircase. It is a steel tunnel of 85 steps that descends from the cliff to the waves, preserving the silhouette of the hill. It seems as if there is light at the end of that tunnel, at the bottom of these steps. Below, the waves create an endless whirlwind. And when you walk down those steps towards the sea, everything goes dark at first. As you continue down towards the light, you realize there is no way out. The staircase is blocked by a glass wall, and the sea lies right in front of you. Perhaps that sea was the path to freedom, but that exit is blocked. And as you walk back upstairs, you hear the sound of the sea below combined with the sound of the wind above. If all goes well, you will also hear birds. There is life above you. When you come back into the light, you see a piece of cotton steel that looks like a path. It leads to the brick wall on the other side, but that passage is also blocked. Dani Karavan says, he is lost here. He can no longer find a way out. Then, close to this point, there is a path going up. It is unpaved. It resembles the path that the party that Walter Benjamin was in had to walk on through the mountains.
I've seen photos of it, of course, and the staircase is really impressive. But is the artwork even more impressive in real life?
Yes, because the experience continues. This small, unpaved path winds up the hill, leading you to the walls surrounding the old Catholic cemetery. Just as you start to wonder if you are still within the artwork, or if it's merely a series of coincidences, you encounter an olive tree. To its right, a 5-step cordon steel staircase appears. The olive tree itself symbolizes the struggle for life. It stands there, vulnerable against the harsh rocks, the unrelenting stones, and the salty, fierce wind. There is also a cactus there. The cactus symbolizes the refugee. Dani Karavan says, "The cactus is now a native plant in Palestine, but the Spaniards brought it from Mexico, where it is native. The cactus can endure everything." Behind and above the cemetery is a small platform made of corten steel with a single square stool on it. The stool is positioned in the center. Only one person can sit on it at a time. The stool is there for you to be alone and meditate while looking out at the sea. Here too there is a fence between you and the sea. Another obstacle between the view and the sea, between you and the horizon, between you and freedom. And when you sit there and meditate for a moment, you can hear the trains in the distance, near the Port Boo station. And that is where the freedom is. The wind, the sea, the birds and the trains create a mix of sounds of freedom.
How beautiful!
We are not there yet, because then, further on, at the back of the cemetery, in that wall, you see a door. Surprisingly, the door can be opened. And then you find yourself in front of a natural tunnel of cypress trees. These trees create almost the same view of the sea as the other view in that steel tunnel down there. Halfway down that cypress avenue on the left is a single grave with a real gravestone. And there it is. Now you have arrived. That is Walter Benjamin's final resting place.
What an incredibly poignant description of the monument and the whole area around it. What does that place, and Dani Karavan's interpretation of it, mean to you personally? And how does all this connect with the broader theme of remembrance and storytelling?
You know, when I was there, it was raining. I was completely alone. There were no other people to be seen anywhere. I took a lot of photos there, but you don't know how to photograph it. My first photo, in fact, was of a woman who had driven there, walking her dog. She didn't linger. It made me think of all the people who have passed through here in search of a better future. But I also thought of my friends from Ukraine who still have a country to be proud of, but who don't dare to go there because they have seen their homes and their lives go up in flames. And at the same time, there are other friends from Russia and Belarus who no longer have a home, simply because they decided that their country could no longer be their country. And I also thought of the people I had met in Kosovo a month before this visit. There in Kosovo, where people still faced the threat of their Serbian neighbor and where they could lose their country and their future in one fell swoop. Dani Karavan created this monument for all of them. Karavan's work features a quote from Walter Benjamin engraved in the glass above the infinite whirlwind. It is more difficult to honor the memory of the anonymous than that of the renowned. historical construction is dedicated to the memory of the anonymous.
And now? How is it now? Do you still see Dani Karavan?
Dani Karavan passed away in 2021. Interestingly, just a few months ago, a wonderful documentary about him aired on Dutch television. It was quite bittersweet. After a lifetime of receiving almost no attention here in the Netherlands, this beautiful film appeared after his passing. I suspect it was acquired from abroad, but no matter. I'm not so sure how many people saw it. It was broadcast at the time when most were tuned into a talk show. But for me, seeing that documentary brought immense joy. It was filmed in 2021 during the coronavirus epidemic, mainly in Israel, a few months before Dani Karavan died. You see his wife, you see his children, and Dani Karavan himself, of course. And there he was, that wonderful man, as talkative and open-hearted as he had always been. I miss him. I realized once again what an enormous opportunity we have missed now that none of his works of art have ever been realized in the Netherlands. The podcast series The City as an Ecosystem is an initiative of Carolien de Jager, Hogeschool Rotterdam, and Evert Verhagen, Creative Cities Amsterdam. You can find all episodes on Spotify and on the creativecities.nl website. There you will also find any background materials in a PDF file with the same title. Today I was accompanied by the AI voice of Holly from Azure Speech Labs. The music is by John Toba. The piece is called Alhambra and I found it on Free Music Archive. It has a CC BY NC SA license.